Howdy everyone, I'm Brayden with EG4 Electronics, and I have in front of me a GridBOSS fresh in the box out of our warehouse. Now the GridBOSS is a microgrid interconnect device, often shortened to MID, which is effectively a very smart busing system that can allow multiple AC inputs, generator, grid, hybrid inverters, or maybe even AC coupled solar systems, and manage the power flow between all of those dynamically using its very smart PCS systems. PCS meaning power control systems. Let's go ahead and open this up and see what components are inside. Now that we've got all the tape cut off, let's take a look under the hood. Here on the top, we of course have our packing foam, and we have, it looks like a lot of breakers in here. Let's take a look at what sizes these are. We have a 70, a 70, a 70, an 80, 30, 40, 60, 60. So we have a 30, a 40, two 60 amp breakers, three 70 amp breakers, and an 80 amp breaker. Now, as we'll see here in a sec on the GridBOSS, the ports, we have the 70 amp breakers, which are the default you would need to include our 18 kPV in the architecture. And there's of course up to 3 of those. We have an 80 amp breaker for effectively the maximum of AC coupling you may have in there. And then there's some 30s, 40s, and 60s in here for what you may use for a typical smart load. So it actually comes with a couple of breakers here in this first version that could be used with your smart ports and with an 18 kPV. We also have our grid and generator panels for, I'm assuming, breakers that we would place in the absence of having one on your system. We have, these look like, yeah, of course they are mounting bolts with a couple of additional screws in here that may be for replacement purposes. Right in here in the corner, we have, looks like says neutral ground bonding hardware. Okay, so this is what you would use to bond your neutral and your ground. And then inside here, we have a bunch of various bolts for, I'm assuming we're going to use these to place the GridBOSS on the wall, as well as maybe some additional replacement bolts, maybe some screws for that purpose. And then we also have some RJ45 connectors in here that we can use for crimping onto wires if we need to pin something out for, say a specific product. Now, here it looks like, these are the caps that you would put on knockouts. If you were to knock something out, but you don't have conduit to run through, you'd want to put these on the knockouts in order to keep it outdoor rated at IP65. These are some smaller knockout plugs as well. I think that's everything that's in there. Go ahead and set this all back down. And of course, here at the top, we have our mounting bracket that we would use to put on the wall to mount the GridBOSS. And then there's some side brackets for additional support. Let's go ahead and pull this top off here and unleash the beast. Oh, one sec. I actually have one more thing in here that I have yet to point out. That is our Wi-Fi dongle. This is what we would use to put into the GridBOSS to allow us to connect to EG4 monitoring services, be able to remotely monitor and operate your GridBOSS. And then of course it has your credentials to add it to your account. Awesome. We got our GridBOSS here, complete with wrapping all over it, which we're going to tear open so that way we can access our GridBOSS. Now, looking around to make sure there's no little loose components hanging out in here that may fall. Doesn't look like that's the case, so we're just going to go ahead and lift this bad boy out. Now, it's important to note while I'm getting this out of the box that this is a rather heavy unit, and usually 2 people is recommended for the installation of large inverters or products like the GridBOSS. Alrighty, I set the GridBOSS to the side. I'm going to do a double glance in here. Make sure we didn't drop any components. Doesn't look like that's the case. I'm going to go ahead and move this out the way. Alrighty, here we have the GridBOSS. I'm going to go ahead and pop it open. Okay, we don't have any loose components here, so I'm going to set it upright. Now, before I put it forward, we can see here on the back, we have our mounting equipment, as well as a couple of knockouts if you need to go through the wall behind the GridBOSS unit, or for some reason it is sticking out, you can put some knockouts through the back of it and run conduit where needed. Alrighty, the front of the GridBOSS here, we have LED strip along the bottom that will indicate various inputs, their status, and so on and so forth. Once you have the system operational, that can be very critical for understanding what is going on if you are diagnosing or installing the GridBOSS in a system. Now that we got our GridBOSS opened up here, we see we have 4 smart ports and 3 hybrid inverter ports. The smart ports, of course, will be used for our smart loads, as well as AC coupling solar onto the system. We have 125 amp, 80 amp, and 260 amp ports on that. And then we have 3 hybrid inverter ports up to 90 amps each. Of course, you can always put smaller amperage breakers on that for a smaller load or system that you are implementing. Say for the 12K PV or 18K PV, you would need 50 and 70 amp breakers instead of 90, respectively. Now down here, we also have the backup breaker, which will be active whenever your hybrid inverters need to be powering the critical loads alongside the grid generator, etc. But if you want to disable those for the sake of maintenance or installing other stuff to the system, then you'll need to move over your interlock and use your manual bypass to allow the grid to keep powering your home. Here we have where our grid panel and generator panels would go if we didn't have that respectively. So we have our grid breaker pole right here. We have our grid panel if we need to block that off. And then of course we have our panel for the generator if that gets knocked out, but we need to block it off. Now that we got an overview of what it looks like on top, let's take a look underneath. Now I've removed all the screws from the front plate, so we can go ahead and pop this out. Set it off to the side here. And underneath, we see where our breakers would go on the bus for the smart ports. The hybrid inverters, of course, these have very smart circuitry and relays to allow them to have the functionality of each of these systems. We have our breakers here for the backup and the manual bypass. And then we have where our grid main breaker would go right here, as well as our generator would slot in right here, which you can see down on these bottom lanes. It's a little low for me to look down, but that should be visible right there for you. And then of course we have our ports for backed up and non-backed up loads that you would run to the critical loads panel or your main house if you have this set up for whole home backup. And then we have what looks like our contacts and RSD switching all up in here, which will go to this RSD switch that has total rapid shutdown if you're using EG4 inverters with EG4 batteries. So that's what it looks like under the hood. And those white fuses were actually used up here. They are spare fuses for your grid input. So figured out what those were for. It looks like they are up in here. That's what they're used for. Now, it looks pretty simple, and to be honest, it pretty much is. The installation of this will save a lot of time and money by getting rid of a lot of the boxes that you would need to be putting on your wall, which you can find in this detailed video that I'm going to link in the description below, where I go over all of the ins and outs of what the GridBOSS can do. But this is a very simple installation that does a lot of the work for you with all of the smart technology built into the busing system. Let's go ahead and put it back together and see what all we have. Of course, the GridBOSS comes with everything you would need, from plugs to breakers to the panels to cover up knockouts, mounting hardware, neutral ground bond, the Wi-Fi dongle to get you connected with our robust EG4 monitoring system, some extra fuses for your grid input, and the actual mounting brackets. The GridBOSS comes with everything you would need to get this installed quickly, efficiently, and save you a lot of time and money. Make sure to check out the GridBOSS at EG4electronics.com. Like and subscribe if you like these kinds of videos, and leave a comment down below for feedback that goes directly to us. We really appreciate it. Y'all have a great day. Thanks for watching.